Hey, what's up guys? This is John with The Makers. Today I'm going to be building a blanket ladder so easy you can make it yourself at home for under 40 bucks. Check it out. Blanket ladders are, in my opinion, one of the best examples of functional home decor, meaning they serve a purpose and look great in your space. When we first decided we were going to use a blanket ladder in our house, I immediately went online. Unfortunately, on places like Etsy and Amazon, it's kind of hard to find a really nice blanket ladder for under 75 bucks. And that's when I decided just to build one. Today, I'm going to show you how to make a super easy blanket ladder using just a couple of tools and 3 boards. Let's go. The first thing we need to do is pick up boards to build this blanket ladder. For this project, I typically like to go to Home Depot because of their selection of high-grade lumber. The first thing we're going to do is find the boards graded as Select Pine that measure 1x4 and 1x6, both cut at 6 foot. We're then going to buy 2 of the 1x4 boards and 1 of the 1x6 boards, again, all measuring at 6 feet. We're going to start building this blanket ladder by first cutting the side rails out of our 2 1x4 boards. I like to start by shaving off the end grain on one side of the 1x4. This removes that rough edge and makes sure that my board is square. Next, I'm going to flip the board and measure down from the end I just cut. I want the finish height of my blanket ladder to be 5 feet, so I'm going to make a mark at 60 inches and cut my board. Now I'm going to put this 1x4 aside and repeat this exact same process with the other 1x4 so I can create both legs of my ladder. At this point, both ends of the legs are square. However, I want the blanket ladder to lay on the wall at an angle, so I need to bevel one end of both legs. I do this by using the miter scale on my saw and adjusting the miter table to cut at a 15-degree angle. I then line my board up so that the angle of the saw blade barely reaches the corner tip of the 1x4 when I complete the cut. This ensures that my board still remains at an overall height of 5 feet. I'll then set this piece aside and repeat the exact same process with the other 1x4. At this point, you should have 2 1x4s, both cut at 5 feet, one side with a square edge and one side with a 15-degree bevel. Now that both of our legs are finished, we can move on to cutting the rungs of our ladder. I then flip the board and measure down from the end grain I just cut. Since we need to get 4 ladder rungs out of a 6-foot board, I'm going to cut each piece at 17 inches. Just a quick side note here, before you cut the rungs of your ladder, make sure you reset your miter saw table to cut at 0 degrees. This just ensures that your rungs are square and prevents a lot of frustration in the future. Now that you have your first rung cut, just repeat this process 3 more times, cutting each board at 17 inches. Once you have your 4th and final rung cut, then you can move all of your pieces over to your workspace to get ready to assemble. The first thing we want to do is figure out the spacing of our ladder rungs. We do this by placing our tape measure at the square end of the side rail and making a mark at 6 inches. Measuring from that first mark you made, place 3 additional marks down the side rail, with each mark being 12 inches from the last one. Also notice which side of the board I am marking. Make sure you are measuring and marking on the side where your angled cut is the longest. Once you've made that final mark, measure to the end of the board. The distance between your last mark and the long tip of the angle should be 18 inches. Next, simply repeat this exact same process on the other leg. At this point, I just like to go ahead and dry fit my pieces just to make sure that the spacing is exactly how I wanted it. I do this by placing one corner of the rung against the mark that I made, and then I angle the board so it's opposite the angle I cut the feet on the rail. I know this probably doesn't make sense as I explain it, but just take notice of the orientation of the boards and you should be fine. Now that I know it looks just like how I want it to, I can actually start assembling. I like to start by running just a small bead of glue down the center of each grain. This just prevents the ladder from just pulling apart over time. Now we can set the first rail. I find it's easiest if we line up the side rail with the top rung first. Try to get the corner of the rung lined up against that mark the best you can. But if you are off a little bit, it's pretty easy to make a slight adjustment. Once you're happy with the positioning, use a nail gun to shoot a 1.5 inch 16 gauge nail in the top rung to hold it in place. Then position the corner of the bottom rung against the line and nail that in place. After the front is secured, make sure that the rung is angled enough so that the back corner is flush with the side of the rail. Then nail it in place. Simply repeat this process until all the rungs are secure. I will admit that this part is a little tricky when you're working by yourself because each rung can move until you get it nailed down. It's definitely much easier if you can find someone to help you through this process. Okay, so now that we're done with that one side, I can go ahead and flip the ladder and repeat the gluing, positioning, and nailing of the other rail. This part is definitely way easier since your rungs are already nailed to the other rail and they can't move. Sweet, now that everything's nailed together, I'm just going to take a wet rag and wipe off all my excess glue. So now that I have everything cleaned up, I'm going to let this glue dry for about an hour. And hey, while we wait, why don't we take a look at some of the tools I've been using. The adjustable miter plate combined with the XPS cross-cutting indicating light makes sure that you get the most accurate cut the first time. The Stanley 25-foot measuring tape is small, compact, and light, making it easy to carry. But what I love most about it is its integrated lever locking technology that holds your tape in place each time until you disengage the lever. The 5-inch random orbital sander from DeWalt weighs just under 3.5 pounds and spins at 12,000 OPM. The dust collection bag features a one-handed locking system that makes it super easy to attach and remove. And this final tool is by far my favorite. DeWalt's battery-powered 16-gauge straight finish nailer keeps me from getting tangled up in a long hose and having to lug around a heavy air compressor. Its brushless motor powered by a 20-volt lithium-ion battery allows you to drive 1.25 to 2.5-inch nails with ease. And that's a look at some of the tools I've been using for this project. So if you're looking to add to your collection or just wanting to make an upgrade, all these things can be purchased using the link down in the comments. And I think by now our glue should be dry, so let's get back to the project. Now that we made it to this point, it's really important we give this blanket ladder a quick sand. Now, because we use such a high grade of lumber from the very beginning, I can get away with just using 120 grit sandpaper right from the get-go. My goal for this is just to soften the sharp edges and remove any slight imperfections that might have occurred during the assembling process. And that's it. We now have a fully assembled blanket ladder that's ready to be stained or painted. But because we live in Nebraska and it's the middle of November, I need to take this project somewhere a little bit warmer. Unfortunately, I don't have a heated shop yet, but luckily my mom has a heated garage, so we'll haul this project across town and finish it there. This particular client wanted a stain blanket ladder, so I'm going to be using a Minwax wood prep along with a dark walnut stain. We're also going to need some shop towels and a couple pairs of gloves. You can also find a link to these products in the description below. Whenever we stain a project, it's really important that we start with a wood prep, which is otherwise known as a pre-stain. This pre-stain will soak into the wood and actually allows our finished stain to absorb evenly. I typically apply the wood prep pretty liberally, and this just ensures that it gets in every single nook and cranny of this project. Once I'm finished, I'll just take a shop rag and quickly brush over the top. This is just to clean up any runs or puddles of liquid that's left on the surface. After that, we just let the pre-stain absorb for 10 minutes. At this point, we can now apply our finishing stain. Generally, when staining, you should split your project up into sections. This way the stain doesn't sit for too long in one spot or not long enough in another. But when it comes down to it, each person has a little bit different of a staining technique. Most of the time, I tend to like applying the stain with a foam brush and then immediately wiping with a rag. I feel like it gives me good control over how much stain actually absorbs into the wood. Once I'm finished staining, I'll go back over the entire thing with my rag to remove any excess stain that's just sitting on the surface. Then we'll let it sit for about 4 hours to allow the stain to really penetrate into the wood. After that, we'll come back and vigorously rub off any remaining excess with a clean rag. After that, the final step is just sealing this entire blanket ladder. For this project, I'm just going to be using a clear polyurethane spray from Krylon. Whenever I'm using a spray can of any kind, I like to attach a spray handle. I find it gives me a little bit more control and prevents my hand from getting tired. We want to spray just a thin layer of polyurethane as evenly as possible on all surfaces. This will help us prevent runs of liquid as well as help the coat dry faster. Once we're finished spraying, we'll put the project back in the heated garage to dry. Once it's dry, we'll bring it back out and do another coat of polyurethane. We'll keep repeating this process of spraying, drying, and spraying and drying until we have at least 3 or 4 coats of polyurethane on all surfaces. Just a quick tip. One thing you can see here is that I start spraying the sealant just before it gets to the wood, and I keep spraying until I just pass it. This helps to get a nice even coat across the entire surface. If you start spraying directly onto the piece and your hand hasn't started moving, you can end up with just a blob of liquid that dries in the form of a ring, or worse, it forms a run. Now we'll just throw a couple more coats on there, wait for it to dry, and we'll be finished. When that last coat of sealant dries, you should end up with a finished product that looks something like this. And that's how we build a simple blanket ladder using just a couple of tools and 3 boards. Hey, if you want to see more content like this, be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel.